Okay. So in our next sections, we have Derek from Moesif, Moesif, and then he will be talking about the best practice when monetize the API. So, Derek, can you hear me well?
Yep, I can hear you just fine.
Okay, yeah, your voice is also good, and I see your slide as well. So I pass the time to you. So, okay, thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Patrick, and happy to be here at API Days Hong Kong. Today, I'm going to be talking about how to monetize APIs and some of the best practices we've seen as we work with different companies. A little bit about myself. I'm the CEO of Moesif. We're the leading API analytics and monetization platform, and I love to focus on API-first strategy, growth of API products, and product-led growth strategies. And a little known fact is I do love IPAs, so it's a little late here in San Francisco, but you know, if it was on a Friday, I might be at the local bar drinking an IPA. So why is it that selling to developers is so hard? You know, selling to developers is drastically different than it was 10 years ago when we think about selling enterprise software. 10 years ago, you know, probably we're building out a large field sales team and selling right on site. And you're probably likely talking to the C-suite or VP of sales or VP of engineering or CISO or whoever it is that you're selling to. These days, the way that enterprise software is bought is very decentralized, and individual developers have a lot more autonomy than they used to. All you need is a senior developer to discover API, integrate it, maybe in a test environment, and before you know it, they actually are championing that type of software technology throughout the organization and pushing their management team to actually buy that piece of software. The other thing that makes it very challenging is that a lot of these different APIs and technologies can be built internally, or you can adopt open source software. So how do you actually punch above, you know, all these different technologies and try and make sure that your solution, your API is actually discoverable and can be adopted? And so, you know, this is going against a lot of these things around not invented here syndrome. Developers can build it themselves. So how do you make sure that you can actually sell to developers? But the other tricky thing that people have to keep in mind is it's not just up to developers themselves when they make a buy decision. You have legal and security review, you have procurement processes, you know, for example, compliance risk. Is this piece of software SOC 2 compliant? Does it comply with HIPAA compliance? There's a lot of different things that a developer has to get buy-in from different stakeholders before that piece of software can be pushed out to production. Now, the tricky thing with APIs is a lot of times it is touching production data, and that's actually what makes a lot of these processes even more complex than buying a piece of software for, say, you know, the HR team or other different areas of the company. So one way you can actually circumvent a lot of these problems is by landing developers first. And what you're doing here is trying to get a developer to pay a token amount. Maybe it's 50 bucks a month, maybe it's 100 bucks a month, but it's something that's very small and just gets them started so they can see value in the initial API. And whether that's just in a staging environment, maybe they're kicking the tires a little bit, they're just trying to play around with the API and see, does this fit my needs? And is something that I should spend more time to investigate, due diligence on, and then present to my management team. And another way to actually get around this stuff is by trying to reduce and remove a lot of these blockers that we usually see when you're adopting enterprise software. So for example, instead of dealing with legal and security review, why not just have a click-through terms of service? A developer can go to your website, sign up for your service, go through a self-service onboarding flow, and choose a plan automatically without any sales involved up until that point. In addition, having a very simple and fast integration process. So that, you know, installing their SDK or getting started with the API is more of a matter of 10 or 15 minutes rather than trying to plan out a 6-month pilot period with a very, very lengthy and a lot of different stakeholders involved to roll that out. The other big piece is just having the ability to leverage a manager's credit card. That way, the developer does not need to go to procurement before they can actually start paying for your API service. Now, the tricky thing here is this is not the end game, right? This is just a way for a developer to start seeing value in your API, get them to recognize and get them to see that aha moment before they're actually chatting with their stakeholders and management team and putting their own credibility on the line to say, this is the solution that we need at the organization. And so when we think about selling to developers, you're actually selling through developers. And you're leveraging these developers who already are using the API, testing it out, and getting to leadership to sell something else besides the API. So for example, it might be certain enterprise requirements. And this might mean, meeting compliance requirements, single sign-on, maybe it's around data privacy and security. It could also mean a higher levels of usage, right? So a single developer might just be testing this in a staging environment where they're at a very low volume, but once this is rolled out to production, that volume could drastically increase, and it could be at a pretty rapid clip. The other thing is other teams, use cases, adding things like advanced analytics or reporting for the leadership team to understand and make sure they're getting the best ROI out of the API platform. Now, what does this mean for sales teams? It actually means sales is getting engaged at a much later stage than what we've usually seen for enterprise software. At the point that a sales team is getting engaged, the customer might have already integrated, they might be paying a token amount, they've already seen value in the platform, and they actually probably have played around with it quite a bit. So you're leveraging these developers as a champion, and you're actually trying to reach and make sure you're able to get their leadership team on board. And so at the point that sales is getting engaged, it's actually growing usage, and it's more of an expansion play rather than trying to go from 0 to 1, which can be really hard when you're selling to a technical audience. Now, other thing to keep in mind is you're actually trying to be consultative. How do you help the organization get more value out of the API? Whether it's additional use cases, it could be professional services, it could be additional features and such. And how do you help them meet certain requirements and meet the goals that they have? Now, the tricky thing is each API business is drastically different. And so today I'm going to walk through some of these different decisions that you have to make when you think about monetizing an API. And when I say monetizing an API, that means you're a relatively API first organization, and you might be selling the API directly to developers. And so some of the things I'm going to talk about is prepaid versus postpaid billing. Should you set up your pricing as a tiered pricing structure versus more of a pay-as-you-go model? When do you actually invoice an organization? And how do you actually set up different support tiers? So let's first talk about prepaid versus postpaid billing. So anyone that's had a cell phone, in the last decade, you know that you can buy a burner phone and you actually just put on $50 worth of credits. That's the prepaid billing model. Or you can actually set up a phone bill, and after your monthly usage is done, you pay that bill, and then you might have a $50 a month bill or whatever that is for your phone. And so there's pluses and minuses to each of these billing strategies that I'm listing here. On the prepaid side, this is something that a lot of enterprise organizations are already familiar with, especially if they've been buying enterprise software for quite some time. You usually buy the software before you ever actually see any value out of it. It's also better cash flow for your business, right? Because if you're buying a year up front, or maybe it's even beyond that, you're already able to bring in that revenue before you had to service the API. Now, the tricky thing here, though, is going to be harder for developers to onboard with your API, especially because now you're asking them to commit dollars before they've seen that much value in the API itself. And it can be also harder with pay-as-you-go, especially if you want to implement some type of usage-based model. How do you actually implement a prepaid billing model when you don't even know what the usage level is like, right? So now a developer, as I'm signing up for this new API, I don't know if I should buy 1,000 widgets or 100 million widgets because I haven't even implemented that yet. And so when we go to the postpaid billing model, this is where we can actually drastically reduce the onboarding friction, right? Because they can actually get started and start using the API before they even committed any dollars to your company. And it also makes pay-as-you-go much easier because now, it's whatever the last month is, or however you design that pay-as-you-go model. They don't need to think about how many widgets they need to buy before they start playing with the API. Now, one of the tricky things here is there could be additional credit risk. So if your API is very expensive to serve, right? And you have a lot of vendors you depend on in order for that API to be reliable and usable, then that could be dangerous for the business. Because what happens if a developer, signs up for maybe it's 100 free accounts with 100 different emails, or they don't actually pay with a credit card, but then you actually have a large bill outstanding. So that's one thing to keep in mind with this prepaid versus postpaid billing concept. Now, the second thing I want to talk about is packaging strategy. And the tiered pricing model, which is on the left side here, that's something we've seen with traditional SaaS companies. You have the good, better, best plan. And it's a nice way to reduce the number of different decisions or mental decision making that a developer has to make as you're looking at your pricing page. There's only 3 options typically, right? And so they start with a smaller plan, and they naturally will upgrade their plan as needed. And the nice thing here with the tiered pricing is it enforces minimum spend. So if your support costs are very high, and it'll be very hard for the unit economics to work out if a developer is paying 5 cents a month for your API, then a tiered pricing model might be able to help with that side. It's also very easy to implement. You don't have to deal as much with tracking transaction volume or usage-based pricing and stuff, which I'll talk about in a second. That could be very hard to roll out. And so a lot of times people would like to start with the tiered pricing before they move to a pay-as-you-go model. Now, one of the tricky things though with tiered pricing is to be very rigid. What I mean by that is you're going to have a developer that's on your lowest paid plan, and they're paying $100 a month because they see $200 a month in value out of your API. But then let's say your next tier is $500, and then they go from $200 to maybe seeing $300 in value from the API. Now what's happening is there's a gap, right? They see $300 of value, but your next tier is $500 in value or $500 in cost, so they don't upgrade and they get stuck. And so trying to figure out where the paywalls make sense, how to make sure you can push people to that next tier, that can be very difficult. And that's where the pay-as-you-go model can be extremely beneficial for your organization, because now you're taking away all the friction around expansion. It's a very natural process. They a developer will start off paying 5 cents or $10 a month, and naturally will grow as that volume or usage or whatever metric you're metering on increases over time. So this allows you to truly grow with your customers. Now, one of the hard things to deal with though with a pay-as-you-go model is dealing with billing surprises, right? You don't want a developer to put down their credit card. One week they were paying $10 a month, and the next week suddenly it skyrockets to $10,000 a month. How do you deal with those type of surprises, and how do you manage expectations? And that can be a very complex thing. It requires a certain level of expertise around customer success and support and the right analytics and metering to ensure you can reach out and make sure they don't have those surprises, which can be very upsetting for a developer as they're trying out new software. The third piece I'm going to talk about is invoicing strategy. And there's two different things that you can, or two different approaches you can take here. On the left side is recurring, which is usually per month or maybe it's per quarter, per year. There's some type of periodic schedule that the organization will receive their invoice. And this is pretty common with SaaS companies and allows you to layer in even usage-based. For example, you can look at the usage for the last month and then send the organization an invoice for whatever the last month's usage is worth. It's much easier for finance teams to deal with, because now you can align that to per month, per quarter when it comes to things like GAAP accounting and revenue recognition. It's also a lot more predictable for both yourself and the company that's buying from you. However, one of the hard things is it could have very bad unit economics, especially for very, very low cost SaaS solutions or very low cost API solutions. What I mean by that is what happens if you do have that developer that's paying 5 cents a month because they're using, say, S3, does it make sense to actually send them an invoice every single month for 5 cents worth of transactions? And that's where we see things like the threshold-based invoicing can actually be very beneficial. This was used quite heavily within the ad industry, where you're reaching some type of threshold. Maybe it's like $500, and then you send out the invoice, or it's $1,000 and you send out the invoice. It doesn't really matter where they are within their billing period. They could have 3 invoices one month, and then the next month it's almost 0 invoices. And this could actually be beneficial when your API has very, very different volume requirements for customers depending on the month. One month they might be using a lot, but the next month it might be very low, right? And that way you can make sure that you're not extending too much credit by having a lot of the outstanding bill and you haven't collected yet. However, one of the tricky things here is it can be very hard for the finance team to actually deal with these very ad hoc invoices. You're actually could be increasing company liability, especially if you implement a prepaid billing model. What I mean by that with prepaid and threshold-based billing and invoicing is you're actually buying as a customer a certain number of credits. Maybe I recharge my gift card or whatever you want to call it with $50, and now that has to be considered in terms of the balance sheet of the company, right? How do you deal with those credits that could be outstanding but not used yet? The last thing I'm going to talk about is value metrics. And so trying to figure out what is the right thing to actually meter on and invoice customers on, that can be very tricky, right? Because if you choose one metric, it might not be aligned to the actual value a customer receives. And so I've outlined 5 different metrics here. The first is transaction volume. We've seen this a lot within different analytics companies, messaging companies, chat APIs, where you're literally tracking the number of messages sent through the platform. The second here is a revenue share or cost share model. Stripe is one of the popular companies that leverage this, where as a lot of people know, is 2.9%, or maybe you can negotiate a better rate. Don't kill me if I said that. The third here is data volume. We see this a lot within log management. Some of the infrastructure companies recharging based off of the actual volume itself in terms of gigabytes. This could be also things like minutes consumed or minutes sent or transcribed. The last 2 here is user-centric, which we see a lot within any type of customer-facing tool. So this would be things like Segment, where they track monthly tracked users or monthly unique users for the month. And the last is resource-based. And these are things like compute hours. It could be maybe machine hours or something like that. We see this a lot within infrastructure companies, cloud vendors, where you're literally paying per hour per compute unit or something along those lines. But the tricky thing, whatever metric you're deciding, it has to be aligned to customer value. What I mean by that is, let's say your API is an email API that handles sending out emails to generate new leads or something like that. And you could choose 2 different metrics. One metric would be the number of email templates or HTML templates inside the platform. And the other metric you could choose is, let's say, number of emails sent through the platform. Well, let's say you actually wrote out the first pricing strategy, which is the number of email templates. And we're going to say it's $1 for 1 email template and $100 for 100 email templates stored in the platform. Well, the problem there is, what if someone starts setting up your API, they never ever send a single email, but they did store 1,000 templates for a lot of different use cases that they envisioned, but they never were able to get around to sending out those emails. Now they have this $1,000 a month bill, but they never were able to send out a single email, which their initial goal was to actually outreach to their customers, or maybe to new leads or something else. So if you choose a different metric, such as a number of emails sent, or maybe it's a number of different email contacts reached, that is a lot more closer aligned to the value that the organization receives. So that's why we strongly recommend thinking about what is a true value a customer gets before deciding what you to charge on. Now, one of the tricky things, though, with all the stuff I just discussed, is how do you actually scale account management and support? Because it's one thing when you're dealing with a small group of enterprise customers, but when you start rolling out, usage-based pricing and self-service adoption or bottoms-up adoption, then you have to actually start managing the needs of hundreds of thousands of different developers, each with different needs at the same time. And so you're going to see issues during onboarding. You're going to see 400 errors or 500 errors on the API, SDK issues. You can see changing business needs. Initially, maybe it was just a couple of developers playing around with the API, but suddenly they need separate reporting for management to see. And then again, the billing surprises that I mentioned. How do you actually manage those expectations and make sure organizations are aware of what the usage is and what the billing will look like. And so the easiest way to do this is by adding as much of this admin and operation stuff into your customer-facing portals and apps as much as possible. So for example, for managing billing and usage, should have the capability for developers and their management team to log in and see exactly what their usage is trending, what their bill is going to be for the next month, and also allow them to play around with the data so they can see what can they optimize, or what can they, what is the ROI they're getting, and if they need to optimize something around the API, they can do so. So providing those tools for them to self-admin and rectify these type of situations, that can go a long way for improving your developer experience. Similarly, send out automated notifications at the right trigger points. So for example, if someone increases their usage by 50% in a week, make sure you have a system in place that will automatically notify those accounts and those organizations. Just let them know, hey, your usage has increased quite a bit. Maybe it makes sense for you to either upgrade your plan, talk to someone from our customer success or support department, and we can figure out what makes sense based off of your changing requirements. And so what we usually recommend in this case is you're going to actually have some automation for maybe some of these self-service customers, but you still want to have some of that higher touch outreach for folks who, maybe they're on a higher support plan, or they're on some type of contract where they, deserve and expect, that higher touch process. But making sure you have both is extremely important, especially when you're managing some type of API product and trying to make sure you can drive growth. The other thing that you can actually leverage is some of these different marketplaces that are available for you. Things like Amazon Marketplace, Microsoft Azure, they all have ways for them to integrate your API, but also start paying for your solution as a line item on their AWS bill that they already probably have. And some of the benefits with this is it actually allows you to actually sell your API faster, because now they don't even have to deal with the manager's credit card. You also don't have to deal with issues where the manager leaves the organization, now that credit card is expired, and it's already actually set up almost as an enterprise agreement without actually going through all the steps that you would normally need to actually set that up. Lastly, the big thing to look at is how do you leverage both qualitative and quantitative feedback. It's one thing when you're dealing with 20, 50, 100 accounts, we can easily just chat with those folks, understand where they're struggling, why are they not able to adopt the API, what issues are they running into. But when you're dealing with hundreds of thousands of developers, each with different experience levels and such, you really need to take a metrics-driven approach to understand where developers drop off. And what I'm showing here is a 4-step funnel. And this is what we usually recommend for any type of API first or developer first organization. We are tracking this process and drop off from page visit, which is a developer initially discovering your API, whether that's landing on a blog page, it could be some documentation, it could be your own landing pages or your home page. And then we're seeing what is the conversion rate to sign up, right? Is it 10%? Is it 5%? Is it 20%? How many of those folks sign up? But then for a lot of API products, you're going to see a lot of folks who don't ever end up sending traffic through the API. They sign up and they're actually not a developer. They can't do anything, right? And so tracking that rate of sign up to first hello world, that's probably one of the most fundamental metrics for any API first product, right? And so what we're tracking here is both the percentage, the conversion rate, right? What percentage of signups end up sending their first API call, right? Whether that's through Postman or curl or maybe another tool. And how long does it take? Is it 15 minutes? Or is this like 20 hours because they need a bunch of other things before they can even start testing it? And if it is 20 hours to make that first API call, then maybe there's some things you can do, such as making sure they have very clear and concise examples, documentation, tutorials, videos, copy paste API keys. There's a lot of things you can do to shorten that time. There's another metric that's equally important, which is what we call time to first working app. Some companies might call this time to revenue service, or time to a full deployment. And what we're tracking here is how long does it take to for a developer to go from making that first API call, which again might be just through Postman or just some test traffic, to actually having a full working solution with your API. And that's rolled out to production. And that could be in the hundreds of thousands of API calls, and they might be using different APIs, maybe it's 5 different APIs put together. And so tracking that also allows you to understand, how many folks, they gave a little bit of effort, through Postman to test the API, but were they actually able to build out a full working solution and get that deployed? And so these are the 2 things we recommend: tracking conversion rate and how long does it take to reach that next step. But also the tricky thing here is there's a lot of different developer personas. Some folks are going to sign up with their Gmail account. Some folks are going to sign up with their work email address. You're going to have different channels that they discover the API through. Maybe it's through paid ads. Maybe it's through a blog post. Maybe it's through efforts from the sales org. You're also going to have different experience levels. You're going to have senior developers and engineering managers.
So, sorry, Derric. So it's almost time. So, do you have maybe a few 10-second wrap for your talk, so that we can also let the audience to follow up some question offline with you? Yeah.
Sure. On here, the key takeaway is deliver a great self-service developer experience.
Okay, thanks. Sorry for interrupt. So because the time is almost running out, so just you share some of the patterns to talk about API monetization. So if any audience is interested in that, so feel free to reach out Derric or reach out to API Days team. Okay, so thanks for your support again, Derric. So see you soon. Thank you.